class, let's get started. We have a lot to cover tonight. So punishment. Have you ever been punished for doing the right thing? Can any of you think of a time? Anybody got a real quick story? Punished for doing the right thing? No, that's okay. I got one for you real quick. Does anybody have one? When I was in first grade, I remember I had the substitute teacher who wanted to name the person who passed out the papers to the other students the PP, for paper passer outer. Now in a first grader's mind, that's the worst thing you can name, the paper passer outer. Do you know what I'm talking about? So, the student next to me said, "Why is it a PP?" I said, I wanted him to not think badly of the substitute. I was trying to defend the substitute. I was doing the right thing. And I said, "It's because it's a paper passer outer." And I got in trouble for it. How did you respond when you were, punished for doing the right thing? I mean, I was upset. I think I cried. That's my response was to everything back then. Just cry. If you're happy, cry. If you're sad, cry. I think that this is an issue for all of us, and we find that this is an issue for Peter's readers. So we find them, just as a reminder here, in what modern-day Turkey, right there, in all these various places Peter's writing to them. Probably a lot of Gentile Christians here, and some Jewish Christians. But Peter is really trying to address them at a point of need. They're being beat up a little bit, right? They're trying to do the right thing, but they find themselves being punished by those around them. It's kind of like, you guys remember, did you ever have a teacher who would throw candy at you when you were getting the right answer? You were excited, like it motivated you to do the right thing. It'd be like a teacher throwing a baseball bat at you when you gave the right answer. That's kind of like, things aren't going the way they expected. They're not being reinforced the way that they would like. So if somebody could read for me 1 Peter 3, verse 13. Anybody got that? Olivia?
Who is going to harm you if you are eager to do good?
So Peter starts off, right, with this rhetorical question. It's very interesting. There's this phrase that I want you to take note of, class. Zealous for doing good. Peter's not just talking about people who are passive about doing good or think good thoughts about doing good, but he's actually describing people who are devoted to doing good, to doing what is right. This term was actually used of the zealots in Jesus' time, and those people were very zealous for their cause, right? Peter's not talking about zealots here, but people who are like the zealots in their desire to do good. So do you think, this is a big question that I want to ask, that Peter's kind of posing here. Is there a link between harm, abuse, slandering, suffering, this suffering that Peter talks about, he uses different terms in this passage, and doing the right thing? Is there a link here? So let's go on to find out. Verse 14. Does somebody have verse 14 for me? Anybody?
But even if you should suffer for righteousness' sake, you will be blessed. Have no fear of them, nor be troubled. Thank you.
This is an interesting passage. Peter uses, in the Greek, he uses the optative mood. Does anybody know what the optative mood is?
Daniel does.
Yes, Daniel.
It has to do with a wish for the future?
Yeah. So, I didn't remember this from Greek class. Dr. Waddell said, go look it up in chapter 24. And there it was, chapter 24. But the optative mood, it describes this future reality that's probably not going to happen. So it'd be like saying, if I die tomorrow, if I should die tomorrow, I don't think I'm really going to die tomorrow, but just in case I do. But Peter, he says, if you should suffer. Now, are Peter's readers suffering? Is this a reality in their life?
Yes.
Yes. In other places, he affirms that they're suffering. So why would he say, if you should suffer? Why would he make it sound like it's not really going on? I think it goes back to what Cal was talking about, minimizing the bad. I think this is what Peter's trying to do. He's not doubting that they're suffering, but he's minimizing the suffering and comparing it to God's eschatological blessing, right? This future hope that Peter has been talking about, that there is a hope that is coming, something that is greater. So in comparison to that hope, their suffering is nothing. Even if you should suffer, you are blessed. You have found favor with God. You have a new reality that you live in. It doesn't matter compared to that reality. This present reality is nothing compared to the reality to come. I think that that's what Peter's trying to get at for his readers. And he goes on and he's saying, hey, listen, don't be afraid. Have no fear of them. And Peter, again, we've talked about a lot how Peter loves Isaiah. He's starting an Isaiah quotation here. So he starts quoting Isaiah 8:12, changes the wording a little, but not significantly. And he goes on in the beginning of verse 15, he's continuing this passage in Isaiah. Does somebody have verse 15 for me? So, yeah.
But in your heart set apart Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect.
Good, thank you. So here, Peter, he changes the words of Isaiah 8:13 pretty significantly. He actually inserts the word Christ into Isaiah 8:13, which is not there at all, right? Isaiah doesn't use the word Christ. But Isaiah is talking about setting apart God as holy, declaring him as holy in the midst of your situation. And here Peter, he says that Christ is the Lord. Christ is the Yahweh. He is the King of the universe. He's the one in the core of your being, Peter says to his readers. In that place where fear likes to take its residence, I want you to remove that fear and put Christ in its place. Christ as the King of the universe. Christ who is Yahweh. Right? So Peter is elevating Jesus. And then he tells us how to respond to suffering. He says, I want you to share the good news. Instead of being afraid, instead of worrying, instead of crying, whatever you do, I want you to be proactive about doing good. Don't stop being zealous for doing good, but continue. Share the good news in a gentle way. He tells them to share it gently, not harshly, not bashing people over the head. I remember one time I got really upset with my brother. I told him if he threw one more snowball at me, I was going to get him. And he threw one more snowball. And that was it. I grabbed, back then I used to carry around this huge Bible with like a hardback journal and a zipper thing, because I thought I was real holy. And I met my brother around the corner at our hotel, and I took that Bible and I hit him in the face as hard as I could. I ended up with a chip in my tooth and a scratch on my face. You know, I was the big brother. I don't know how that went. But that's not the idea here, right? That's not gently sharing the good news. That's harshly sharing the good news, quite literally, right? But also with a reverence toward God, maintaining this fear of God that Peter talks about throughout his epistle. Acknowledging it's this balance, right? We don't want to water down the gospel. We don't want to make people so comfortable, like the pastor at the crossing talked about. We don't want to make them so comfortable that we don't confront them. Right, but we want to maintain this balance of fear of God and gentleness towards people. But verse 16, Peter continues. Does somebody have verse 16 for me? Danielle?
Keeping a clear conscience so that those who speak maliciously against your good behavior in Christ may be ashamed of their slander.
Good, thank you. So Peter is challenging his readers. Again, doing good in the midst of bad. This is a clear theme. He starts off asking them, who's going to harm you if you're zealous for doing good? Well, Peter's readers say, obviously, people are harming us for being zealous for doing good, so I don't know why you're asking, Peter. But he says, listen, even though this is what's happening, keep doing good, right? He wants them to share the hope that's in them. That's a good thing. He wants them to keep a good conscience through maintaining their good behavior in Christ, right? So it's out of this union with Christ that their good behavior is going to continue to flow out of them, and that they can maintain a good conscience before God, that they can maintain this life of integrity before God. And this will lead, we see, this is actually parallel to 2:12, which was in Kel's passage. It can lead to two different results. In Kel's passage, the people saw the good works and they glorified God. In this passage, they're put to shame. So they can glorify God in the day of visitation, or they can be put to shame. The reality that Peter is trying to communicate to his readers is the way that you respond to suffering is going to affect those around you. If you continue to do good in the midst of the bad, you can either cause the people who will slander you and abuse you, you can cause them to turn and glorify God, or you will cause them to say, I don't want a part of this. And on the day of visitation, when God visits the earth again, right, when Jesus physically comes back, it's going to be either a day of shame for them or a day where they glorify God. So verse 17, this is Peter's summary statement. Somebody have verse 17 for me. Joe?
For it is better if God should will it so that you suffer for doing what is right rather than for doing what is wrong.
Good, thank you. So again, Peter's kind of bringing his point to a close here, kind of wrapping it up in one statement. And he again uses the optative mood, if God should will it so. So it carries with it this idea that God might indeed, and he actually is, in this case, willing it so that you should suffer. God is letting this happen to you, right? But I think that this might be another way that we can reword this and kind of grasp this. It is better to suffer now in God's hands, right? If God should will it so, that means that God is the one in control of this situation. We can trust him. It is better to suffer now in God's hands for doing the right thing than it will be to suffer God's wrath for doing the bad thing, right? So it's this challenge to continue to do good in the midst of bad, because it's better to suffer for doing the good thing now, because this suffering is going to end. But for those who continue to do the bad thing, their suffering is to come. So we see, again, this whole theme in this passage of doing good in the midst of bad. So is there a link between the harm, abuse, slander, suffering, the various words that Peter uses, and doing the right thing? Is there a link, class? What have we discovered? Yes? No? Maybe? Yes, right. So these people, for doing the right thing, they did experience it. For Peter's readers, they would obviously say yes. So doing what is truly good, the issue is it often challenges the status quo. Right? They're living differently than the people around them lived. And that causes the people around you to get upset when you do that. When you challenge them with your actions and not just your words. We see this in the civil rights movement, right? They were challenging the status quo. They were fighting for equality. They were fighting for the good thing, the right thing. And they suffered for it. But ultimately, we see this in Jesus. The very person who is good himself, goodness embodied. He was always doing the right thing, and he suffered. So we can absolutely say, with Jesus being our primary example, that if we continue to be zealous for good in the midst of bad, we can affect change.
All right.